Hello, everyone. Can you hear me good back there, Shima? Okay, great. Thanks for coming, everyone. I don't know if I need to stand on here or not, but I don't think I do. We're also live streaming this, by the way, so. Do I need to stay at this microphone? Does it matter? I can move? Oh, I can move. I like to move around. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Elisa Crespo. My pronouns are she, they, and I am the director of the LGBTQ+ Resource Center here on campus. And I want to tell you a little bit about the Resource Center, just in case you haven't been there. We're open Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, Tuesday to Thursday, we stay open until 6. And it's a wonderful resource space, place to hang out, beautiful windows, get some coffee, have your lunch, meet other students, and then we do things like this. We do all kinds of different events. The idea for this event actually came out of a discussion with the director of the Wolf Institute. Yeah. Oh, I do. Okay. I gotta stop wandering around. And each year there's a Hess Scholar on this campus. And this year we're having Melissa Murray. And you might have seen a handout about that up here on the podium. And Melissa Murray is a legal scholar focusing especially on Supreme Court legislation and other legislation. And she's a podcaster. And she teaches, and she has a podcast called Strict Scrutiny. And Gaston Alonso, the director of the Wolf Institute, and I were talking, and actually I had a conversation with President Anderson from the college, and she mentioned, wouldn't it be great to have Chase Strangio, who just argued this case for trans-affirming care that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And so I thought that would be a great idea, and I passed it by Gaston, and he jumped on it and was able to talk to Melissa Murray and get Chase to come. So next week, let me make sure I have the right time and everything. There's a handout. Did everybody get this handout when you walked in the door? Okay, good. So next Wednesday, April 2nd at 12:30, right back here in this room, is a panel on individual rights. Oops, I have to get back over here. Dobbs and the Future of Individual Rights is the name of the panel. And so Melissa Murray and Chase Strangio, along with a couple of other panelists and our own Paisley Cura, will be moderating that. We'll be here next week, 12:30. Please do come. So when I was talking to Gaston, I said, I really want to have as many trans-positive, trans-informative events as we can, given what's going on in our country. And so this is also Trans Week of Visibility leading up to the 31st, which is Trans Day of Visibility. And so I've been working on several programs. Some of you maybe already came to the others that we've had. And I'm super excited. I've known about Kai for a long time. I show these short little documentaries about her when I visit classes, almost invariably. And so I've been working very hard to get her to the campus to tell her story. And then we put some other incredible people that I've also been aware of, Elisa Crespo and Professor Janet Johnson. So that's what it's about. And then we were able to also get Professor Stephanie Von Gisuto to agree to come and moderate the panel and have a discussion with our guests and the themes, and then we'll open it up to you all to have some questions. Then we will have a small reception. Come on in. Just be sure and sign in. We'll have a small reception over in the center. So if you have time, you can come follow us over to the LGBTQ+ Resource Center and grab a sandwich after today's panel. So I really want to thank all the panelists. I also have some kind of sad news, which is that Kai is sick and was not able to make it today. But don't worry, because there are a lot of amazing little short videos that are documentaries on her life. And so we're going to watch those first off. So you'll get to know Kai's story. What else have we got? A couple of other quick announcements. Every spring we hold a lavender graduation ceremony, and here is the sign-in sheet. If you or anyone you know is LGBTQIA plus identifying and is a candidate for graduation, please sign up. It's incredible. So it's a great celebration, beautiful food, lots of fun, entertainment, speakers, special guests. And so if you know somebody or you are graduating, please do attend and talk to us to sign up, okay? I have to also plug our Women's and Gender Studies program. I have a handout here if you want to see specifically what those course offerings are. I know everybody's about to register for fall classes. There's also an LGBTQ minor right here at Brooklyn College. So if you want more information on those courses, check it out. What else? I also have to announce this. So CUNY has two really cool things. One is a council and one is a consortium, LGBT, queer. Okay, I'll just make it simple. A council, a consortium. They do different things. I'm members of both. The council does an annual queer conference. And so it is all day on April 4th in the Bronx. There's a bus that leaves from Brooklyn College at 8 a.m. on Friday, April 4th. If you're able to attend, it's also incredibly fun and informative and amazing. So that's here. If you want to come up and use the QR code and register, please do that. I need to thank just some individuals. I want to thank this campus, our college president, President Michelle Anderson, because a lot of this programming really did come out of conversation with her. She's incredibly supportive of our community. And I need to thank Gaston and the Wolf Institute for helping with this as well as a lead up to HUS Week and Chase's visit here. I need to thank our center staff, Aka Chinwezi and B. Friedman, who really are part-time people who do a full-time job for the center, honestly. Aka made the mistake of coming an hour early today to eat his sandwich, but then managed to start working immediately anyway. So the kind of dedication is really amazing. And I also want to thank the LGBTA board. So Brooklyn College has a club, and the LGBTA, or LGBT Alliance, that's the name of the club, and the e-board of that club has been doing incredible work. They had a trans Day of Visibility clothing swap yesterday, so I have to thank them. And the panel in general wouldn't be possible without our co-sponsors, the Wolf Institute, the Brooklyn College chapter of PSC CUNY, I see Joseph is here, Women's and Gender Studies program, the Women's Center, the We Stand Against Hate, Enhancing Understanding and Compassion at Brooklyn College, and the LGBTQIA consortium that I mentioned earlier, CUNY's consortium, really underwrite all of this, all of the programming that we're going to do. And PSC CUNY is providing the lunch that I mentioned that's happening afterwards in the center. So please join us for that. And okay, I think I'm going to introduce our wonderful moderator, Dr. Stephanie Bonvisuto. She, her is an instructor at the Departments of Women's, Genders, and Sexuality Studies at Hunter College and Brooklyn College. Her research focuses on and centers on gender and sexuality identity development in context of social space, politics, and pop culture, and has published book chapters and co-authored articles regarding these investigations. She holds a PhD in Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies from Stony Brook University with a degree background in sociology. Dr. Bonvisuto has been engaged with LGBTQ plus community since coming out in 2005, working with various LGBTQ plus community centers and university-based student centers as well. So I'd like to welcome Stephanie.
Thank you. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me in back. We're good? Excellent. So first of all, good afternoon. I would like to thank Kelly and Brooklyn College LGBTQ Resource Center for creating this space today for us to gather and discuss the timely, profound, increasingly radical, and therefore dangerous issues of trans healthcare. I say none of this with hyperbole. While earnestly and fervently discussed by allies, advocates, parents, educators, and where we can find them, sympathetic politicians, this subject matter is, and perhaps always has been, defined by the language of protest, heresy, dissidence, and revolution. Now, some of us may cringe and retreat from that, insisting that we are not political, that we have no agenda beyond just wanting to exist. Yet, as we are increasingly seeing, to just exist as transgender within the current regime has become inescapably politicized. Indeed, we need only check the current administration's list of banned words to see just how many of them can easily be applied to trans healthcare. Transgender, transsexual, non-binary, gender, gender identity, gender diversity, gender bias, racial justice, BIPOC, Black and Latinx, feminism, assigned at birth, they, them, women, men, immigrants, bias, bias towards, inclusive, expression, identity, intersectional, accessible, disabilities, orientations, DEI, pronouns, female, health equity, health disparities, vulnerable. The list, of which these words comprise just a fraction of, is stunning in its scope and breadth, if not its sheer authoritarian audacity. We need to consider, acknowledge, and appreciate how this coming together 2 months after the inauguration of the current administration to discuss these words, their meanings, and their impacts describes a very real form of resistance. And, as a corollary, to consider, acknowledge, and appreciate why this coming together would even have to be considered as resistance. When I was first asked to moderate today's panel discussion on trans healthcare, I wanted to start by returning to some basic understandings. So I looked up the meaning of healthcare itself. I did not turn to the CDC as a reason I could not trust information from any institution in this ostensible land of the free and home of the brave that was too afraid to use the words trans or non-binary or queer. Instead, I turned to the American Medical Association, more specifically, the AMA's Code of Medical Ethics. Here, healthcare is defined as, quote, a fundamental human good because it affects our opportunity to pursue life goals, reduces our pain and suffering, helps prevent premature loss of life, and provides information needed to plan our lives. Society, this statement continues, has an obligation to make access to an adequate level of care available to all its members, regardless of ability to pay. A fundamental human good, the opportunity to pursue life goals, reduces pain and suffering, prevents premature loss of life, and provides information needed to plan for our lives. I was thinking not only what these terms mean to marginalized gender populations, but what they can and even should mean when embodied and enacted from deep inside the belly of the cishet normative beast we find ourselves in today. The American Medical Association, as you just heard, sets up no distinctions while delineating to whom healthcare should be provided for in this country. They note no differentiation between any and all genders, the poor and the rich, white versus people of color, the disabled and the able-bodied, cisgender and transgender. Within the operational equality here is implicit equity. Exceptions are nowhere to be found in this declarative statement. This is why healthcare is defined as a fundamental human good, It starts with inclusive accessibility, full stop. And if healthcare should be available to all, it is worth our time to interrogate what that can and should mean for transformative and transgressive gender identities. For instance, the reducing of pain and suffering, and how that correlates to gender-affirming psychological and medical interventions. This is because gender-affirming is another way of saying life-saving. We often don't make that connection out of fear it will be considered overdramatic, even histrionic. But trans healthcare, however we individually define it, remains elemental to self-expression, self-embodiment, and therefore self-actualization. All dynamics taken for granted by the cisgender population, as their alignment with the social norms provides an ostensibly easy channel through which to self-identify. That is very different for the trans community, as our pain and suffering is both internally and externally realized while fighting to exist in this violent, cisnormative society. It is therefore not an extraordinary mental or emotional leap to understand then how trans healthcare can lead to, quote, prevention of premature loss of life. To be clear, I am not referring to the ability to silently pass here, but rather the capacity to be oneself out loud. The trans community's high rate of suicidal ideation is well known and documented. Wolford Clevenger et al., amongst others, notes that this elevated percentage is due in part to, quote, environmental factors that include sexual and physical violence, victimization, rejection, social disconnectedness, and perceived burdensomeness, all factors that can be traced back to trying to survive or even daring to thrive in a hostile, cisnormative environment. Acceptance, implementation, and dissemination of trans healthcare could alleviate each of these harms. The question remains whether that positive outcome is one our society truly wishes to work towards or will retreat from. And finally, quote, provides information needed to plan for our lives. Our lives. Our lives. Let us be exceedingly clear here. The removal of science-based and historical information about trans and queer lives from government sites, both online and out in the wild, sends the same message that the Nazis intended when they burned the books and papers from Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute for Sexual Science, namely that our lives will not be allowed to move forward into the future by torching and erasing them here in the present. It should surprise no one that the books and papers that were fed into that Nazi fire in 1933 dealt with, in part, transgender identities and healthcare. Be assured, though, the trans community survived those flames and will likewise continue beyond the expurgations of today. Of course, believing this, knowing this, fighting for this, doesn't make these purges any less violent to witness and experience. That is why today's discussion is not only politically important, but vital. We have all gathered today to describe the current local, national, and international landscapes in which the trans community seek not only to navigate, but to negotiate. Seek not only to survive, but thrive in. Seek to forge necessary solidarities in the continuing struggle for liberation for all. We have gathered today to remind each of us, all of us, that the time for these critical shares and insights, the time for this dangerous talk and imaginings, which is always a prelude to action, is now. And we must move forward into the future without forgetting all the members of our community's past, whose light and strength and vulnerability have shown and continue to show a way through the darkness. It is for that reason that I wish to dedicate today's panel discussion to all who have gone before us, including and especially Brooklyn College's own Khalifa Muhammad. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Stephanie, and thank you for that dedication. So you can read it off. I worked very hard to figure out. Vice Media has been following Kai's life since Kai was 4 or 5 years old, and I think Kai's 13 or 14 now. And in classes here at Brooklyn College, I often show one that follows her life in Texas from pretty young. But I wanted something a little more contemporary. And so I'm going to show something that's still not completely contemporary to what's going on in her life now. And I'm going to start, though, with a very short, basically like a little trailer for a series that ended up, I think, on HBO, but Vice originally produced this. And it's just 1 minute, so just to give you a little taste of Kai here. So, tell me about the sweater you're wearing.
It's a coat of many colors, like Dolly Parton.
You like Dolly Parton?
Sure.
Why do you listen to her so much?
Mama secretary, I turn paper in Dolly Parton like 30 times a day.
You want to grow up to be like her?
Because I'm like, what?
What did you change about the world if you're
That trans people be free and go to the bathroom they want to go to.
Are you able to use the girls' bathroom?
No.
I can tell you're getting a little emotional with making you sad. Sometimes hard to be brave. Okay, so was I going to need to say anything else? I think I can go right to this next one. You fly the chicken giant like a princess that you are. Come on.
Okay, but what if I don't want to touch disgusting dead worm skin? Let me sleep. Ella! Shut up! You are so loud.
Go?
Yeah. Juliet don't like me.
She doesn't. She lets me go.
Okay.
We first met Kai when she was just 5 years old, living in a conservative suburb of Houston.
My mom thought I was a boy and dressed me like a boy. I didn't like it. So when I was 5, she knew I was a girl. But she didn't know, so I had to tell her when I was old enough to say it.
For nearly 2 years, Kai's mom, Kai Shappley, fought their local school board so that Kai could use the girls' bathroom. The suicide rate for a transgender youth is 41%. That is why we are fighting so adamantly for these children. Julie lost that battle. And in 2018, she moved her family to Austin, where she hoped Kai would be safe. But in late February 2022, following an opinion by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, Governor Greg Abbott ordered the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services, or DFPS, to investigate parents who support their trans kids' gender-affirming care for, quote, child abuse.
The concern is that these children could be separated from their parents.
Oh my gosh, I missed you guys. This is so great. Good to see you too.
Over the past few years, Kai has become one of the most outspoken young trans activists in the U.S. In 2021, her testimony in front of the Texas State Senate helped stop a bill that would have criminalized gender-affirming care for minors.
I've been having to explain myself since I was 3.
This new directive is an attempt to stop trans youth from accessing medical care anyway, even though major medical associations say that care, which can be anything from puberty blockers to hormone treatments, is medically necessary.
Come on, stay upstairs.
So this is your room?
Yes, this is my room. This is Dolly Parton's place. She gave them to me after I sent her a letter in a big box of stuff. And then so there's something to it.
So cool.
And then over here are our beds.
Oh my gosh. How fun. This is, you guys like get to have this fun party every night.
Yeah, we have 5 kids. They're really cool.
So cool. Do you ever think about the sort of what ifs?
I obviously still feel worried about this, but I'm not exaggeratively worried because I know that we'll make it.
In those moments when you do worry, like what are some of the thoughts that go through your mind?
What if they took away? What if they took me away from Mom? What if they arrested Mom? What if they took me somewhere? What if they forced me to do something things? What if all these thoughts moving through my head? Like, what if this happens? Should I do this? Should I jump out the window?
Has that sort of displayed in the last few days?
It's been getting a bit worse. Whenever I needed some help or anything, let one of my friends know, like Scott or my mom know, a big shout out. My mom's been with me my whole life. I wouldn't have made it without her.
Why have you been sleeping with me the last 2 nights?
Well, there's 2 reasons. One, so that I wake up on time. The second, because I'm a bit afraid of what's been going on.
You need to remember that there are what?
So more people like us than I can say.
And you need to remember that it's my job to.
One day, it's my time to tell my story.
Okay. When the governor came out with the order a few days ago, what was your experience sort of seeing that?
Initially, just texting with other moms, just to literally and calling just to cry with each other. And then the text messages started coming. CPS called me today. And your heart drops. And you're just, this can't be happening. You're totally numb and this can't be happening. And then, the next text message comes and you're like, oh my God, this is literally happening. What do we do? Who do we ask? Who do we call?
Do you talk to Kai about like what to do if a CPS investigator showed up? What to say, what not to say?
I did talk to her about if CPS were to show up at school, just get on her Instagram and go live and keep her phone on. And I told her the ways that I would be able to track her, and that I would come get her. Make no mistake, I will come get you.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to think about Kai being taken from my home and given a boy's haircut and made to wear boy clothes and called by her dead name 24 hours a day, where no one will harm her because they want to fix her. I will find her.
Within 48 hours of Abbott's directive, 5 Texas district attorneys declared their offices wouldn't pursue cases against parents of trans kids, and even some of those tasked with enforcing the directive disagreed with it. One DFPS investigator agreed to speak with us anonymously.
Do you guys have to answer the phone, answer the door, talk to an agent like you?
No. They can say no. They don't have to listen. It says they don't have to listen to the phone. I don't know that was in this call.
You are risking your job by talking to us. Why is it that important to do this interview?
I know that these children are in great homes. I know how anxiously it is. The first thing I ever talked to a reporter, the reporter was crying, saying, oncologist made the comment that the family was impeccable. And the first, they don't listen to me. Was that the person is an Indian reporter?
This isn't a bigot, it's not a hateful person, it's not someone who's anti-trans, someone who just felt like they had to do this or they would lose their job.
This is really not for the one I think it is. It's a journey. You have to train your neighbors. This is the problems. This is what we do in active homes. Is to move people out to train their kids. Terrific. That's what we do for a living. That's literally in the interviews. I mean, that's what someone said. To get them to the trust process. My whole job is a job. That's all I do. And in these cases, I can't tell them.
What do you fear about this woman?
My fear is that these children will be taken back to where we were 30 years ago because there's people that do believe in this, who have power, are using the power for political reasons, not safety. And I can't imagine that we would vote this parents not to do this.
The order against trans kids in Texas is among this year's most drastic anti-trans policies so far. But it's not the only one. 32 states have introduced over 128 anti-trans bills, and 37 of those bills focus on outlawing gender-affirming care for minors. So what have the last few days been like since the governor issued this order? It's really just been an absolutely all-out attack on this community, and unfortunately it's nothing new. This last legislative session, we had the most anti-trans bills introduced ever in the state, and so it's just been kind of a constant barrage attacking this beautiful, wonderful, resilient community. What was your reaction when you saw the order come through? I was heartbroken. All it wants to do is take a lot, but not hard enough.
I was a trans kid. This would have affected me. This affects a lot of trans kids that I know. It's so divorced from reality, divorced from science.
Opposition to Abbott's order is mounting. After a lawsuit, a judge has already temporarily blocked a DFPS investigation into one family. The AG appealed immediately, and the case seems to be heading towards a drawn-out legal battle. In the meantime, clinics like the Texas Children's Hospital have already stopped providing hormone treatments. And families like Kai's are left in limbo.
It's been trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. And the only goal I have is to protect my kids. I have no agenda. The mood in Texas is so dangerous. I mean, you know my evangelical background. I mean, I am a Christian, but what's happening in Texas is so much bigger than just
what's happening to trans kids. And I think we better recognize it really, really soon. So will I move? Yes. Will I leave everything behind? If I have to. Will I fight like hell? Yes. Trans kids are taking it upon themselves to educate the public. Earlier this year, Kai and her friend Sky, a 13-year-old girl from Arizona, started a YouTube show, Kai and Sky Talk Politics. Every week, they interview other trans kids around the country and inform their audience about issues facing their communities. They let us take a peek at one of their rehearsals.
Put it on the computer so I can screenshot. Hi guys, welcome to Kai and Sky Talk Politics, a trans convention. My name is Sally Worston. I'm 13 years old and I'm from Phoenix, Arizona.
Hi, I'm Kai Shappley. My pronouns are her, she, like the candy bar.
So much is going on in anti-trans legislation this week, the first week of March 2022, and everything is moving so quickly.
SB 1138 in Arizona. This bill will make it illegal to have any gender affirming care under the age of 18.
There was some good news this week out of Utah where HB 0127, a trans healthcare ban, has died.
Another one of the good things that's going on is the ACLU of Texas is suing the state of Texas from investigating parents who support their trans kids. Cases are being opened and investigated right now, and parents are being urged to refuse to talk to DFPS. If they call, do not let them in your home, and immediately reach out for legal resources. Resource lists offered by ACLU of Texas, Equality Texas, and Lambda Legal. Whatever your gift or talent, please use that to help trans kids.
If you're a trans kid, we would love to invite you to be a guest on the show and share your experience being a trans kid in politics. Send either of us a DM on Twitter and Instagram.
Aka, is Aka? Oh.
You know, talking about oligarchy for years, people get it's not a rut.
Let me just grab something here. So I wanted to also say that the film that I mentioned that follows Kai also fills out some information I want to tell you, which is that her family was very anti-trans. And even though Kai, from as soon as she spoke, as you could see, was saying, you know, I'm a girl, Mom, her family spanked her and even said, spanked her really, really hard, which I almost translate like beat her. When she was and prayed over her and had her pray, and she wasn't doing so well, and one day Kai's mother, Kimberly, heard her praying when she was 4 years old, praying to Jesus to let her go to heaven now, and she didn't want to ever have to come back. And so for a 4-year-old to say that, you know, Kimberly realized this child is suicidal. That's what that looks like. That's what that is. And so she started the very next day letting Kimberly identify as Kimberly. So I just wanted to put that in. The next film in the series, in this series of videos that I'm not going to show the film, but I just wanted to like literally just show you like what's happening, is them leaving Texas because of the anti-trans bills that are passing that would make it just impossible for Kimberly to even trust her beloved neighbors, who now legally, at this point, 3 years ago, have to report Kimberly as abusing her child. Like, that's like, they have to. So they left, and at that point in time, there were only 3 states that would, that they could flee to as a family and not be extradited over state lines. So they ended up in Connecticut. And they have since then, since I don't know when, like within the last year, they actually moved somewhere in upstate New York. So they live in New York now because now we're also a sanctuary state. Yeah, so I just wanted to fill you in on that. And now I'll hand it back over to you, to Stephanie. Yes, we can turn this off. And if you want to introduce.
Sure. So we have two speakers today. We will start off with Elisa Crespo.
Thank you for having me. I do need to at least cover. Yeah, okay. But I need to look at my notes. So we're very excited to have, is it Elisa?
Is Elisa. Is it on?
Elisa Crespo. Her is the executive director of the Stonewall Community Foundation. Prior to Stonewall, Elisa spent several transformative years as the founding executive director of the New Pride Agenda, where she built the emerging organization from the ground up, creating a thriving statewide advocacy powerhouse. Elisa was instrumental in the implementation of the New York State's multi-million-dollar Lorena Bourgeois Transgender and Non-Binary Wellness and Equity Fund, one of the first kind in the country. After graduating from John Jay College, so CUNY graduate, where she studied political science and human rights, Elisa held numerous community organizing roles and served as the education liaison to the Bronx Borough president. As a trans Latina woman, Elisa is a trailblazer in the nonprofit sector, where just 5% of New York City area nonprofit leaders are Latino women. Welcome, Elisa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I first just want to say, like, aren't trans kids brilliant? I mean, can we just snap for Kai? Like, I was as dark and as deep and as scary as those clips were. I couldn't help but to be so like moved and impressed by just how witty and intelligent and brave and capable and smart Kai and her friend were. Like I'm still sitting here just like shocked. I'm Elisa Crespo. I use she, her pronouns. I have the privilege of currently being the executive director at Stonewall Community Foundation, which is just as old as I am. So I'm 35, and the organization I work for is also 35 years old. So that's an interesting fun fact for me to share. I was born and raised here in New York City. I was born in this borough in Bushwick, Brooklyn, when Bushwick was a very different place than it is today. It's really super cool these days. And I was raised by a working class woman of Puerto Rican descent. My great grandmother came to Bushwick in the 1950s, and since then, all of my family has been born and raised here in New York City. And I moved to Manhattan when I was young. My father's from the Lower East Side, another Puerto Rican enclave here in New York City. And then my dad went away to prison when I was very young. And my mom met another gentleman who also happened to be Puerto Rican from the Lower East Side. And only this time he was a superintendent. That's what he did for a living. And so we moved with him, and I grew up on 30 Christopher Street between Waverly and Gay, in the heart and the mecca of the queer, the queer mecca of New York City, right? And so I was exposed to queer life and culture really young. I was on the track team, and we would go run on the pier, on the West Side Highway Pier. And if any of you know the history of queer and trans people, particularly those of color, the pier, before it was a developed place that became the Hudson River Park, it was like a rundown dock area where queer folks did a lot of things. And I mean, Sylvia Rivera lived on that pier in a shack at one point in her life. Everyone, I assume, knows who Sylvia Rivera is. Raise your hand if you don't know who Sylvia Rivera is. Okay, so there's a couple people. What a wonderful opportunity to share with you who Sylvia Rivera is. Sylvia Rivera, and then I'll get back to telling you more about me, but Sylvia Rivera was born in the Bronx. She was also Puerto Rican and I think Italian. And she was one of the many people that were at the Stonewall riots in 1969. And her and Marsha P. Johnson and Stormy Delavarre and many other people who were there, Miss Major. And she was just a fierce advocate and trans leader. She co-founded STAR, which was for Street Transvestites Action Revolutionaries. And her and Marsha basically created like a safe house for homeless queer youth. They organized, they helped homeless folks, sex workers. They used sex work as a method to help their community and to provide shelter and food and clothing for their community. And so Sylvia Rivera is a pioneer trans icon and leader, the likes of many others, and I encourage you to Google her. She has a really powerful speech that she's giving in the a year or two after the Stonewall riots at Washington Square Park, where she's on the stage and she's like waiting all day to be given a chance to speak at a time when the movement had kind of abandoned trans people or people that didn't look the way people wanted to look, anyone that was, of gender expansive or, they weren't accepted. They were kind of like ostracized from the movement. People were embarrassed by them. And the movement was quickly became led by people who who understood this assimilationist philosophy of acceptance as opposed to social, racial, economic justice. And so that's who Sylvia is. We all stand on the shoulders of her and many others. But yeah, so I went to the Harvey Milk High School. That's where I graduated. It's a pretty infamous place that had been around for a really long time as an unaccredited sort of like GED program for queer and trans folks. And today is an alternative high school, secondary high school, is a part of the Department of Education that is designed for but not limited to queer people. And a lot of amazing folks from like Legendary and Leomi Maldonado and all these people come up and through Harvey Milk High School and the Hetrick Martin Institute. So I'm a peer kid, I'm a ballroom kid, I'm a person who grew up under the wings of trans women of color, of sex workers. I myself got involved with sex work because that was what other trans women of color were doing. And I thought that was what I also needed to do. And so I also transitioned quite young. I know trans youth exists because I was one. I transitioned at 15. And at that time, there was no Medicaid coverage or any sort of health insurance that would cover gender-affirming surgeries. So if you wanted to medically transition and get, whatever kind of surgery done, gender-affirming surgery, you had to figure out how to pay for it. And so I didn't come from a wealthy background. My family wasn't going to pay for it, and so I had to hustle. And so that was the way that I funded my transition. And then after some time, I had, decided this isn't good for me. This isn't working. I was getting into trouble with the law, and it became very scary. And so I decided that I was going to use my privilege and my voice to figure out how to get into a 9-to-5 job and go back to school. And so after having left college for many years, I first did freshman year at City Tech on J Street. And then after having left college for many years, I decided as an adult in my 20s that I was going to go back and finish. And that's when I went back to John Jay College. I studied political science. I joined student government. I learned about the power of community organizing. And that was what sort of got me involved with politics and taking trips up to the state capitol in Albany, where I met legislators and where I discovered that I had a passion for politics and public policy work. And so after college, I started working for the Bronx Borough president, the former Bronx Borough president, Ruben Diaz Jr., not to be confused with his father, Ruben Diaz Sr. If you know anything about local Bronx politics, you know what I'm talking about. One is an ally, the other is not. And then I had this crazy idea that I was going to run for city council in the Bronx in 2020. And I did that. And that was a big deal because I was, I guess, the first openly trans woman of color to run for public office in the Bronx and in New York City. Thank you. I'm very proud of that campaign. I think we did a magnificent job. Having been a new, unconventional candidate who no one knew anything about. And we gave people a real run for their money, and it was kind of fun. I also had really scary times because obviously there were many people. This was an open seat, and so a lot of people were also enthusiastic and encouraged to run for local office. And I guess someone put a hit piece out on me in the New York Post, which is not trans friendly, about my past and my past as a sex worker. And so that became a little scary because I was in the inside cover of the New York Post. I was printed all over the city, wherever you can purchase the New York Post. And so for a couple of weeks, I was like a little nervous because one of the things you have to do when you run for public office is knock on a lot of doors and talk to your neighbors. And I thought, gee, what if people who open the door are transphobic, or they've read the New York Post and they've seen my face, and like, what can I expect from that? Turns out a lot of people don't really read the newspaper, and thankfully I didn't have any experience like that, and was able to find the courage to get back out there and finish what I had started. And after that was over, I worked for a very progressive Afro-Latina woman running for mayor. That campaign imploded on itself. And then I got a call from someone named Amara Jones, who some of you may know is the CEO and founder of Translash Media and a board member of the New Pride Agenda. And she said, hey, this new startup emerging statewide LGBTQ advocacy organization here in New York that is picking up the mantle of a predecessor organization that had been known as the Empire State Pride Agenda, ESPA. And they had shut their doors and basically dissolved as an organization just some years after we had gained marriage equality in New York State. And so they were like, mission accomplished, great, we're done. We have no more work to do. And some people got together and were not happy about that, and they created the New Pride Agenda. And I was hired as the founding executive director and really created all of the programs and the campaigns and hired all the people. And we are one of the lead statewide advocacy organizations that really pounded the pavement in 2023 to make New York a sanctuary for gender-affirming care. And we helped pass the what was called the Safe Haven for Trans Youth and Families Act, which was a big deal. I wish we had been one of the first to do it, but we eventually got around to doing it. We helped create, as was shared in my introduction, one of the largest publicly funded transgender wellness and equity funds funded by the state of New York, which is a multi-state agency fund that provides millions of dollars to nonprofits all across New York State who serve trans people through direct services, career readiness programming, all kinds of great things. And so that is in its 5th year now and has committed probably over $15 million over the last 5 years. And then I got recruited to work for Stonewall Community Foundation. I got this weird email from this executive search firm that said, if you or someone you know is interested in becoming the executive director of Stonewall Community Foundation, please let us know. And I thought, you know what? I think this is a really great opportunity to do more good for more people and to continue the work. And so I'm now, as opposed to being a grant seeker, we are now a grant maker. And we also seek grants because, unlike a private foundation, we are a public community foundation, which means every dollar that we give out, we have to fundraise for. We are not like a private family foundation that's sitting on a bunch of wealth or a large endowment. And we fund grassroots, trans-led, people of color-led organizations. We started as a local, place-based New York City community foundation under the backdrop of the AIDS crisis, funding local organizations. We still fund local organizations. That is still our core identity, is supporting the organizations here in the 5 boroughs. But we have since become a national funder and now provide grants to 42 states, 132 U.S. cities. And we like to fund the groups that are overlooked, underfunded, that most large institutional funders may not have on their radar or pay any attention to. And that's what we do as a part of our value system and our identity as a community foundation that's for us and by us. And we have a great new grant-making initiative that we just released earlier this week that is a multi-year funding initiative with some of the largest grants that we've ever given out as a foundation. So I'm really excited about that. So if you know any LGBTQ organizations that are doing community organizing, advocacy, power building, narrative shifting, cross-sectional coalition movement work, or services like legal services or gender-affirming care or HIV prevention or arts and culture work, we have made this very broad enough to fund all kinds of organizations. And that's just a little bit about who I am. I'm really just a trans girl from New York City who picked herself up by her bootstraps and figured out how to pull the grit and conviction out of myself to make something of myself. And I'll close by saying that I'm really grateful to Kelly for inviting me here and for the work that you do. I know that universities and colleges are under attack and are being scrutinized, and students expressing their political views are being punished and penalized with impunity, and it's just un-American. And so that may not be the norm at CUNY, but it's still significant that you make space for these conversations and that you invite people like me and that you show videos like the ones you've shown about Kai. So, and thank you, Stephanie, for moderating and for being a professor. I think that's really cool.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker, Dr. Janet Johnson, her, who is the Endowed Chair in Women's and Gender Studies here at Brooklyn College from 2023 to 2025, and Professor of Political Science at Brooklyn College and Graduate Center in CUNY. Her most recent book is the Rutledge Handbook of Gender in Central Eastern Europe and Eurasia, the 2022 winner of the Hilt Prize for the Best Book from the Association of Women in Slavic Studies. In addition to writing scholarly pieces, her work has also appeared in The Conversation, The New Yorker, The Washington Post, The Boston Review, The Nation, and then English Magazine. Thank you.
So I'm going to speak here from a Canadian perspective. I'm going to say first I'm from very near Pearland, Texas, which is where Kai was born. I'm sort of a Texan. I'm a non-trans person, but I'm also a human, and I like to think that I'm an advocate. I'm a social worker, believe in Muhammad.
hashtag now. So it's part of a global movement that we call transnational anti-gender movement that coalesced around the global economic crisis about 15 years ago. The movement has roots in U.S. evangelicalism and an Illinois-based organization called the World Congress of Families, and connections in 2007 to the Heritage Foundation, the U.S. think tank that was behind Project 2025, which laid out in great detail most of what Trump has been executing over the last couple of years, and months. God, it feels like years, doesn't it? I mean, it has been years. There's other 4 years I like to forget about. But the Project 2025 includes the January executive order banning so-called gender ideology and the ban on trans people from the military. But this anti-gender movement also has roots in the Catholic Vatican and other fundamentalist organizations in their response to UN meetings on women's rights in the 1990s. Women's activists were arguing that women's rights are human rights, and that was a radical argument. And it spread really quickly once women's rights advocates started to make the argument that gender was constructed and not just an artifact of biological sex. This created enormous backlash, and the anti-gender movement gained support from regimes like Hungary, which Trump cites repeatedly as a model for what he would like to do, and which banned gender studies more than a decade ago. It's also attracted money from the Russian oligarchs, which are the main funders of the anti-gender movement around the world, and then the Russian regime itself, which has used anti-genderism as a way to destabilize democracy, support extremist groups around the world, and justify its invasion of Ukraine in a couple years ago. I first heard these anti-gender ideas within Russian universities in the early 2000s, when high-profile philosophers described what they saw as a horrifying dystopian future where heterosexual men, for a variety of reasons, including IVF, were not required for society to reproduce and function, and they were horrified. The target of the movement, this anti-gender movement, slips and slides over time and place. It's included attacks on so-called gay propaganda in Russia, bans on same-sex marriage, criminalization of same-sex activity, to abortion, divorce, contraception, and now it's slipped and slid towards being against wokeness and trans issues. Anti-genderism is not a simple backlash with a clear ideology, but a prolific weed that adapts to meet each environment it encounters. The stem of this anti-gender weed are critiques of the feminist idea that gender is constructed and the queer idea that we can love or have sex with whom we want. So from my perspective as one who studies Russia and Eastern Europe, the anti-genderism became fascist in Russia's messaging during the 2020 campaign during COVID lockdowns. They were revising their constitution, and that those reforms gave Putin complete power over Russia. And by fascism, I mean calls for violent overthrow of constitutional democracy to rebuild what are claimed to be traditional values. And I point to the particular cruelty and appeal to our gendered unconscious fears, our phobias. So Russian authorities got people to vote in that amendment process by propagandizing a provision defining marriage as between a man and a woman. There were lots and lots of videos, just two I want to mention. One video ad suggested that if you didn't vote for these amendments, gay men would be adopting Russia's children. Another suggested that you would have to take into your home gay men who had been jilted by their lovers as they grieved their loss. These videos were hateful and fascist, suggesting that sexual rights, gender rights, were a dire threat to Russia's civilization itself. Within a year, Russia's anti-gender efforts were turned towards trans issues. They kind of realized they lost the gay version, and as you see, I think around the world, they switched to trans issues. And in October of 2021, Putin said, the president of Russia, that teaching children about gender fluidity was, quote, and I'm sorry for saying these things, truly monstrous and, quote, verging on a crime against humanity. In the next year, Putin said that teaching young children about LGBTQ issues was, quote, perversions that lead to degradation and human extinction. And so that fascist kind of messaging came to the United States in the campaign and for the presidential election by Trump. Last October, for example, during Sunday Night Football, the Trump campaign created the same anti-gender fascist messaging as Putin with an ad showing footage of Kamala Harris in 2019 promising access to surgery for every transgender inmate in the prison system. That's what it said. The ad ended by proclaiming Kamala is for they, them, and President Trump is for you. So with all this history and context in mind, I've been thinking about how we fight this. And it's not simple. I've been teaching up a storm, clarifying in my classes and everyone I talk to that science is clear, sex is not binary. I've been teaching about the variety of gender systems that existed across the world as long as we have recorded history. Years ago, for example, I spent time in Oaxaca among the Zapotec, who are an indigenous population, who have what we might call a third gender. And this third gender hosts community festivals, and they marry women, men, often in Roman Catholic ceremonies, and they're an intricate part of their communities. But these tactics are tactics of rationality, and anti-gender messages have mobilized deep-seated fears in populations around the world. Psychologists argue that we are driven mostly by unconscious forces, and thus really susceptible by subliminal messages that trigger our phobias. I don't want to give a political science answer today about what is to be done, but surely close observation by people such as Aaron Reed, organizing, strategic litigation to protect our rights, protests, all those things matter. But today I want to suggest something else related to our wellness, which is that we must all name our fears, or I hope we can try to name our fears. This is terrifying. This is all terrifying for all of us. And become conscious of our own stuff through meditation, therapy, if we can afford it, so that we can be present to ourselves and to others, especially to our children and young people. And then I ask us to choose love and pleasure and hope and knowing that these two can be infectious.
Thank you.
Thank you. So what we're going to do now, So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a conversation up here between us regarding some of the issues regarding trans healthcare. And then in a couple of minutes, we'll open it up to the audience as well. So again, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you speakers for being here. I'd like to open up with a general question. Where do you see us being located today, 2025? About 2 months out from the inauguration. Where do you see the trans community being located? Where do you see trans healthcare being located in academia and in politics? It may not be, I shouldn't say that. Let's start with that. Where do you see us being located?
Well, I see trans people being located in the sort of center of an entire political apparatus that has decided that their pathway towards the highest office in the land is going to be to scapegoat us and to throw us under the bus and attack us simply because the average person claims they don't know who we are, haven't met any one of us, and it's very easy to spread misinformation and disinformation. There's a lot of reference made to Nazi Germany, 1930s and 40s, and I try to be to not think of that because it's very scary, but I sometimes wonder if we are on the precipice of something similar in terms of how much further. My friend asked me the other day, what do you think is the worst that could happen to us? She's another trans girl. And she's like, what's the worst thing that you think would happen, like, now? And my response was something like, I don't know, like detention centers, like we're rounded up and detained and imprisoned or something because of our identity. And so that feels like where we may be. But I think it's important for us to fight back and to reclaim our power and to, despite the scariness and the reality of where we are, to find it within ourselves, to to be brave, because the alternative is alternative is unacceptable, and in my opinion, which is at the risk of being silent, your entire identity and existence being, eliminated, for lack of a better word.
Locate us a little, just take a different vantage point. One of the things I meant to mention, but then I didn't get to, was, so I'm kind of using Russia as a way of talking about this in a different way. So until 2023, Russia had a kind of policy of benign neglect when it came to gender-affirming care. And you could basically get it kind of outside of the system, and it wasn't expensive. And then they had an ad hoc policy of legal document change. So in fact, one of the advocates that I've worked with argues that it was quite a good, hospitable environment for trans folks, which is kind of surprising because it's not hospitable for almost anybody in Russia these days. But in December of 2023, all trans-affirming care and legal document changes were banned. And so one of the things that I was observing is this mass exodus of people who could leave from Eastern Europe, because what Russia does kind of impacts Central Asia and Eastern Europe and kind of becomes a leader. Things also bounce around to other authoritarian regimes like Brazil. And so you started to have this exodus to New York City in particular, because over the last 15 years, there has been migration to the United States with this assumption that you could get protected here. And so NYU, for example, and the doctor that I've worked with had been the center for these Russian-speaking immigrants to come through and get the care that they needed in the United States if they could get out of those countries. And I don't know if you heard this right, but NYU was like the first place to capitulate and started not doing gender-affirming care, although they were then kind of backed off. But they were like, okay, we won't do it. So, those are some other locations. And then I want to, I don't know. So here's what I think. There's so many stories that we could tell. But so Paisley Curra has made this argument, who is a better scholar than a better scholar of this than I. Paisley's been working on trans issues for decades and has a great book out that you should look at, Paisley Curra. And his argument is that, underneath all this is really about gender, which affects all of us, right? And I don't mean to diminish the very real concerns, but at root, it's about all of us. And if we can communicate that it's about trying to box us into certain gender categories, I think that can help recruit other folks to thinking about these things. Paisley and I think, disagree because they think that the failure of the Democrats in the last election was because they hadn't really mobilized enough around economic issues. And I don't disagree with that. But I do think that I think a lot of it was using trans issues as a scapegoat. At least Putin, for example, he's transphobic. But I think much of this is strategic, that this was a way, like they literally, with this anti-gender movement, they're like, okay, what can mobilize people to be afraid and to do what we want them to do? And they just kind of move stuff around, and they just came up with trans issues, and right now that and wokeness is kind of the big thing, and it's worked really well. But I do think it's terrifying. I don't mean to suggest that it's not, but I do think that maybe there's a way out of this if we keep, I think talking and loving and being compassionate and being with other people about these issues in the way that Kai just does so beautifully.
I'm not sure if I heard you right, but it was studied, right? Like, it was tested, it was polled, it was by conservatives to see what would work and get them riled up. And it's not a new thing, as you've said eloquently. Another sort of theory, if you will, is that the conservatives were not successful in preventing marriage equality, and so after that had become the law of the land by the Supreme Court, there was a real desire to figure out what would work, what could we stop from okay, this has happened and we've failed at stopping this, and where is this movement going? And that led them to sort of polling and testing voters and stuff about, what do you think about trans issues? And they've specifically done it in a way, as you very well know, pitting women against trans people specifically, right? Like, trans people's rise in power and visibility and acceptance comes at the cost of yours.
Right, it's worked very well for white women. So what I'm kind of, I think, here to do is to say that, like, yes, they did those polls and they did think about it in the United States, but it's also, like, at the global level, also what's been happening, which I guess maybe is another.
They certainly took a page out of the books of other.
They're literally in conversation with each other. Like, there are these meetings that the World Congress of Families had repeatedly, and the Republicans show up, and they're mostly in Eastern Europe, and there are people like Alexander Dugin, who is this horrific philosophizing, if you can call it, propagandist in Russia, who's behind the justification for Russia's war in Ukraine, and the Republicans are meeting with him in various ways. Tucker Carlson interviewed him, and so there's like this whole kind of global network of these anti-gender folks, but there's also a global network of anti-gender activists, and maybe that's our other kind of path forward, is realizing we're not in this alone.
So I wanted to build on this a little bit. You have insight into what Russia has done, what Hungary has done, and perhaps foresight into perhaps what we're looking at as we come to the precipice, as you stated. So having said that, I think it's important that if we're going to talk about a future that seems very fraught, what are ways of positive engagement?
So for me, I think I've been telling people to find their political home, find the group, the project, the organization, the safe space that speaks to you, where there are other people who are willing to like build with you and join in solidarity with you and figure out like how to get through this together. The cliche, but true, real thing is finding community and being with your tribe and your people who understand you and what this feels like for you. And I think that I believe fundamentally that there are many different strategies that can be played on the inside, on the outside, direct action, protests, but also in academia, in philanthropy, in anywhere, in any place. I think people have opportunity to contribute to pushing back against what we're talking about. And so it's all about finding out how you can, like, what are you good at? What are you best at? And knowing what you're not good at, right? Everyone's not good at being like a frontline activist, marching, or direct action, but some people are good writers. Some people are good, with talking points and educating. Some people are good communicators, negotiators, obviously impact litigation. So there's a lot of different ways to get plugged in. And so I think I find myself these days talking about the work and the movement in a way that is accessible to people, so that they can figure out, how can I contribute, right? What do I have that I can give to this movement? Because trans people are a tiny population. That's just the fact. And so we don't have the luxury of not having allies or the greater LGBTQ community, supporting us and fighting with us.
I've been thinking about 19th century salons where people gathered in their living rooms, often led by women. And that's a lot of places where progressive ideas came out, so that the organizing becomes, we've moved online. There's so much of this online stuff, but maybe we have to go back to the home and our community, very close communities. I've been thinking about the second wave movement's consciousness raising, right? So all the times I'm in communities, I'm like, making sure everybody's talking about all these issues and understand stuff. I may be a little bit too pushy, but writing stuff as radical as I can because I do have these privileges. I wish I had more. I wish I had more models from Russia, for example, of success, because authoritarianism is very strong. But when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was a really kind of provocative organization called the Russian Anti-Feminist Resistance, and most of them had to leave Russia. But they've taken the, ovaries and balls to the wall kind of approach, and whatever. Maybe I don't want to use those metaphors, but they've been brave and organized through cells, right? So they, no one knows exactly who's in charge, and they're divided up but connected. Clearly, we can use Signal, sorry. I think we just have to try everything we can, because the anti-gender movement's been trying everything we can, but they're not smarter than we are. They're just more hateful.
Thank you. To continue to build on this, so 2 questions, I think, that take them as you will. How important is solidarity going in this movement? First, and then secondly, there is an ongoing conversation out there, especially it seems with centrists, who would say that we need to engage with the opposition. But that seems both fraught and perhaps even performative at best. What do you think about those 2?
So, I don't know if I would say we need to engage with the opposition. I would say that we need to have conversations with people who think differently than us, who don't always agree with us, right? Not even just in the political system, in general, in community. I think that is important. I think that when we surround ourselves only with people who agree with us 100% of the time, that we do a disservice. And the reality is, the average person is somewhere in the middle of all things, right? Most people aren't paying attention to anything going on, or they see it, they know what's going on, but they're just living their lives and going, taking one day at a time, and they're, working and raising families, and it's all too much for them, and so they kind of just detach from it. But I do think it is important. I do think that if we are actually going to figure out that it's the people that have the power and that there are more of us than there are of them, then we're going to have to act like that, and we're going to have to build coalitions, broad coalitions, and then hopefully that can be a tool where we push back against this system, this power structure. So that's what I would say to that part of the question. And solidarity is critical. It's fundamental. Professor, you spoke about, how a lot of this is trying to put a wedge between women and, cisgender women and trans women. And the reality is we're all fighting for the same thing, right? To be able to make decisions about our own bodies in some cases, right? To control. It's a gender liberation movement, and the attack on gender itself is an anti-democratic attack. So we have to find ways to cloud out that noise and ignore that noise, that propaganda, the misinformation, and understand that we have to work together. And I think I've seen great examples of that in some parts of the country. In my own experience, we worked on Proposition 1, which was the New York State Equal Rights Amendment, which is one of the most comprehensive, inclusive equal rights amendment in a state constitution in the country. Lots of states were doing this, narrowly tailored to protecting abortion access and reproductive care. In New York, we added gender identity expression, disability, among other things, as protected classes in the state of New York. And we had to work. It was tough. It was messy. It was hard because you had big, organizations, Planned Parenthood and others that have mean well, but, haven't always been places where trans folks, trans men or women have been, made to feel welcome. And there were even some people in this work who felt that, including protections for trans people would mean that the ballot measure would fail and that we shouldn't do that, right? But we had to work through the discomfort and all of it. And in the end, we were successful, and New Yorkers overwhelmingly voted to amend the state constitution. I don't know if that's going to save us, but, because the rule of law doesn't really mean anything under this current administration. So it's really kind of just, they threw out the whole playbook. So, yeah.
I was wondering, how does solidarity and alliances and engaging with at least people with different opinions, how has that worked in other countries historically?
That's not where I was going to go.
Oh, okay.
But I make a note. First, I want to say, I think it's really important to not be cynical, because we do have rule of law in this country. We do have rules and norms that protect us. We have norms, especially in New York City and New York State. Those still exist. We are held by them, and if we let them go, I understand where you're coming from. I do that all the time. But it's kind of maybe the way that I was going to answer this question, which is, I think in some ways what's going on is also a reaction to COVID. During COVID, for good reason, we were all traumatized and afraid. And I think that our nervous systems are really triggered continually by this, and we haven't really calmed our collective nervous system down. And, when people saw those ads, for example, that Kamala's for they, them, for inmates, we're talking a couple $1,000s. Tens of $1,000s most out of our trillions of dollars of budget. This is so not an issue, but people are like, whoa. They are not reacting from their intellect, they're reacting from their nervous system. And so there's multiple things. On the personal level, we need to be doing what we can to connect and have compassion. None of us are going to be able to have great conversations with our people who are really far on one side, but most people in this country and in the world are in the middle somewhere, and they just I think we need to act as if this is true, whether it's true or not, and try to connect and have compassion and ask them questions, and kind of calm our collective nervous system. And but at the same time, I did, we had Christiane Nunez here, who's president of National Organization for Women. So I'm like an imp. So I'm like, so how's the trans stuff going? And she's like, off the record maybe, but I don't know. She was like, well, there's been some people on our board who've said some things, and I said that's not going to fly anymore. Right? So I'm also going to do that stuff too, and just, again, try everything I can. So your question was about how is Solidarity's working? Not well. I don't know about, you all probably know this, right? That Britain, for example, and many European countries, the TERF, the trans radical exclusionary feminism, is very powerful. And maybe those are the people I should be talking to, right? Because they're at least feminists, to have these conversations with them. So I think coalition building is going to be very difficult. But maybe more, I see more promise here than there.
Yeah, great, thank you. We still have a couple minutes left, and we'd like to open it up to you, the audience, and your questions to any of us, to all of us, in regards to the issues we've been speaking about today.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm staff here. I work in the food pantry. Thank you all so much, the panelists and moderator. It's really wonderful to hear everyone speak from their own perspective and expertise. Watching Kai's videos and hearing how much you all know, I was wondering how we can specifically support trans youth who might feel really alone and terrible in this state, but especially other states. I'm a social worker. Could I broadcast my skills to trans youth in Texas and tell them that they should continue to be trans and be themselves. I don't know. How can we like use our own skills or I don't know. However, I want to find a way to support trans youth, and I really don't know how.
Yeah. There are some really incredible organizations in New York City that support trans youth. So there's one called Transformative Schools, which is like an after-school program for trans youth, which is also doing a lot of advocacy work in the local school boards and the community education councils in Manhattan, where there are like Moms for Liberty type folks elected to these school boards who are have successfully passed resolutions, non-binding resolutions that call on the New York City Department of Education to review its guidelines around trans youth playing in sports aligned with their gender identity. And that's largely true across the entire state. More dangerous upstate, where school boards have power over curriculum and school policies. In the city of New York, not so much. And so I would support organizations like Transformative Schools. There's another national organization called Gender Cool, which is emerging and wonderful and shares positive, uplifting, affirming stories, showing trans youth being loved on and poured into by their parents and their families, humanizing trans youth and families where trans youth are a part of the family. And I think that that's brilliant and wonderful, and I think it's a counter-narrative tool that we need a lot more of. Lastly, there are some political organizations. There's a great new organization called the Christopher Street Project, which is a 501c4. So this is me speaking here, not anything that CUNY is endorsing, but the whole idea is to push members of the Democratic Party to be unapologetic about their support for trans youth and trans people. And we've seen how many of them have capitulated and walked back after the most recent presidential election. And so it's led by young trans people who are in their early 20s, who are fundraising, who are blowing people out of the water and making people eat their dust. There are so many, national political organizations that claim to support LGBTQ people, have a lot of money and power, and yet they have not been as effective as this 21-year-olds who have started an organization just 2 months ago and are doing a large rally in Washington, D.C. on Monday with members of Congress. And so I've been very impressed by some of these organizations. And I'm sure if you just put out a call on your social media that you have this opportunity, this expertise, you will find people. They will come to you.
I would say I would like to see more support for trans youth in the classroom, on the campuses, in any way, shape, or form. Right now, I teach an Intro to Women Gender Studies class, but for high school students. The program is called College Now on Hunter campus, and we make space for that. We definitely make space for transformative gender identities of all kinds. And I would like to see, whereas some states are obviously rolling back the idea of teaching trans and queer studies, even at a high school level, I would love to see us in New York, especially, lean into that more. I'm not exactly sure how to do that. I'm still kind of waiting for people to stand up and leadership to show us academics, how we can do that. Hint, 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 CUNY. But I think that that's incredibly important, that it's happening not only in politics, but in the classroom. Look, classrooms can be the start of revolutionary ideas. Why are we not taking more advantage of that? So thank you. Yeah. Anybody else?
Excuse me. I guess this is more of an observation, but in the beginning, I believe you were saying that one of the words that were banned from the government was the word woman. So how does that make sense if the bill that was passed in January has the title woman in it, protection for women against gender ideology? And if that's the case, how can we teach the current American, political, current people of America, the adults of America, to read these articles critically? Because that's a contradiction right away. You're saying not to use the word women, but in the bill you're using the word women. So what exactly is it that we're protecting them from in the first place?
Okay, so you said the word sense, which becomes a little bit problematic since January 21st, in my opinion, right? Because a lot of what we're seeing, I would argue, doesn't make sense, and that's actually strategic at this point. So we're seeing the list of banned words usually has to deal with government-funded research, but we are also seeing it expand. Just this week, I had heard that there was, and I'm going to say this without a lot of concrete facts, because I have not researched it myself, it's just come across my social media, that there is at least one school system out in the Midwest that is trying to censor what words can be used in the classroom itself by teachers. So I think that the potential for a domino effect is there. So it's not surprising me that on some level the word woman can be used, and then on some levels we're seeing it banned. Again, that type of confusion I think is strategic. So that does not in any way, shape, or form surprise me. We are also seeing, though, right, trans being, the words transgender and trans, that it's being picked up. The misinformation has been there for a while. It is accelerating now. It's being amplified now, and it is being believed right now. And I'm personally very concerned of what I would think of as kind of almost like wasted time and energies that educators, activists, and advocates are using to answer and respond to the misinformation out there, which again, I think is also strategic. I'm not sure how to combat it because misinformation is taking root and is being seen as fact. So we do have to respond to it, but it is misdirection of so much precious energy right now. I'm not sure if that answers your question. It is my response, though, to your observation. Yeah.
Can I jump in? I was just going to say it was an executive order, not a bill. So it means it's kind of like an idea that has not been adopted into law, but it has been taken into practice. So we need to fight it, and there's lots of strategic litigation against it. And for whatever reason, I see it a little bit differently. I think, I mean, yes, they're being strategic in this kind of like, let's just like do all this stuff at once and trying to confuse us, but I think they're also incompetent, right? Like they aren't actually thinking through, like they do need to mention women, like they have to put women somewhere. And that too is a good thing because we do have rule of law and they cannot in the end. The problem is, as you say, it's going to take a lot of fighting back, and that's a problem.
Yeah, the idea of moving fast and breaking things, which I am told is kind of like the philosophy and the aesthetic in certain tech and startup cultures, but it doesn't seem to be. We need to think of it as that it's not working in government or it's working particularly well with this particular iteration of government going on now. So thank you. Important question. Yes, anyone else?
There was a question.
Hi, my name is Steph, she, her. My question is mainly for Elisa. What you had said about working in nonprofits really resonated with me. I spent the last 6 months working for a nonprofit, and in my experience, we are seeing detrimental cuts to funding from the current administration. I'm wondering if there's anything people can do to currently support nonprofits, especially New York-based nonprofits that are supporting trans use.
Yeah, thank you for the question. The most powerful revenue generator for any nonprofit has been people, individuals, and that will always be true. And I think what we try to demystify where I work is that you don't have to have a lot of money to be a philanthropist or to give or to donate or to start a will or do any financial planning. And yeah, there are a lot of organizations that are having their federal funding clawed back or, cut off from them. What we are trying to do, well, not me, because I don't do that work anymore, but what the new Pride agenda and many other advocacy organizations in New York are trying to do is to get the state of New York to double down, to do more, and to try and invest more money into some of these areas where the federal government is pulling back. That happens to be a lot of areas, and so while we do have a very large budget in the state of New York, it's not unlimited. And so I think part of what is probably happening right now, our budget usually is passed in the first week of April, but not always, is that they're probably figuring out like what is being cut and what can we attempt to try and make up for within our capabilities. But yeah, I encourage people to donate to $5, $10. I mean, we spend money carelessly on things we don't need all the time. And it goes a long way. It goes a really long way. And I think there are so many in the city of New York. There are unlimited amounts of charitable organizations that are serving LGBTQ people. I shouldn't say unlimited, but there are a lot of them here in the city. So I'd be happy to talk with you if you're not sure where to direct that energy. Or volunteer.
Hi, my name's Rooney, use they, them. Something that you guys may or may not have a clear answer to, but it's something that since the inauguration, I haven't really felt like I've been able to get a clear answer to. That's a very concrete thing, is I'm trying to understand what is the risk in a state like New York to trans people actually not being able to access gender affirming care, actually being in a position where they're forced to detransition because care is not accessible. That through institutions, of course, there's always DIY stuff. Well, I say always, but not really. But what is the risk? I feel like everybody's kind of running around with their head cut off, and I haven't been able to find published like an understanding of where that is. Thank you.
So I would answer that question by saying that I come from an era where it's kind of like a DIY black market where you had to get hormones and stuff, where I do not recommend that at all. But I'm just saying, like, we have figured out how to get things that we need when they have not been provided to us through the healthcare system or through insurance. What I know is that New York is not immune from what is happening. We have a county in the state of New York where trans girls cannot play in county-run facilities. That's Nassau County. So despite us having added gender identity and expression to the New York State human rights law, it has not prevented the Nassau County Executive or Legislature from signing this law and enacting it. Now it's being challenged, it will go through the courts, and perhaps it will be overturned, but it's currently in place. They don't know of any trans girls that play in sports, but they did that anyway, so... And yeah, you have institutions like NYU and others that have decided that they're not going to provide gender-affirming care to minors, even though that is the law in the state of New York currently. So it's a real thing that we need to be very concerned about. I don't think it's as real as it is in other places, because thankfully we do have an attorney general who is unapologetic about her support for us. We have a governor who is like, there for us, maybe not as vocally or publicly, but supports us. And we have some real allies in the state legislature. And so thankfully we have that, but if Congress tomorrow passes a law that bans gender affirming care for everyone, then I would imagine we would have to follow that.
Yeah, I mean, federalism is complicated, right? There are state and city laws that protect us, and we can pass more states and laws, and the state can then decide to put up the money to replace that funding that's lost. There's no easy way to answer that question, because, and I don't want to answer that question because we don't want to obey in advance, right? They're not, I mean, I have friends who are still running NIH-funded grants, off the record, not off the record, but who deal with trans issues, like, and they're still getting their money, and they're just going to keep taking it until they can keep taking it. We're going to keep getting our hormones until we can't get our hormones. And so, like, I understand the fear, but I also want to just say, like, we want to not assume the worst, because that then makes it more likely that it's going to happen, and do everything. I mean, I just think we keep doing everything we can. They don't have a right to take that away. They do not have a right to take that away. And we have to keep acting as if that's true, because that's part of how we protect our rights.
I want to sort of maybe answer and ask a question as well. There was a trans student here at Brooklyn College, trans leader, president of the club, and she told me one time that I think if you mean like on a literal physical level, it really varies. Yeah, it really varies, I think. But she had said she had made a decision. She was partially also like, she had kids in Texas, and, you know, she saw this stuff coming down. And she said that she did certain things physically, and this is the way she said it to me, you know, surgeries, to ensure that she would always have to have access. Otherwise, she would get really sick. So I think it really varies.
Hi, I want to say my name, but I don't think I should say my name because I'm here under visa status, so I don't know.
Right.
Okay, so my question is to all of you basically, because I lived in Midwest that what is going on in the U.S. right now, what would you suggest for the universities that have still have organizations that supports LGBTQ plus community, but under threat because the state does not, like, the state is banning to talk about LGBTQ community or making sure that the people can get what they need to get to be safe, to exist in real life. So what would you suggest for those people out there?
I mean, thank God there's the internet.
So can I ask a little bit more about your question? Are you asking?
Okay, so my question is mainly, there are schools that is shutting down the programs and can't have programs, and also the organizations or offices on campus. So like somebody like Elisa or Professor Johnson or Professor Banvisudo, like what would you say? Because not everybody can leave that state, because coming to a sanctuary state and having a living here is not easy. It's really, really difficult. And during this economy, it's very hard. So what would you suggest for the people who are there and can't leave that state? How can the educators support the people and the community and their students to stay positive until this government just leaves, like after 4 years, probably?
Thank you for your question. So I'm going to answer it in like two different ways, based upon the way that I've interpreted your question. So one is like very tangibly, there are some resources out there that will provide funding for people to relocate. There are some organizations that are doing that work. So that's gives me a little bit of hope, you know, that there are some emerging groups that are like literally flying people from one state to the other to receive gender affirming care, or to relocate because for whatever reason. So there's that. And, you know, teachers have to speak up, professors have to speak up. They have to show that they are here to support you and that despite what may be coming from the top, from DC, that doesn't reflect their values in their classroom or in their center that they run. They have to be explicit and vocal, and they have to be straightforward with you and tell you whether this is something that they support or not, so that you know if this is a safe place for you to be in.
And to build on that a little bit, I think it's also incumbent upon us to put pressure on our unions to be vocal in support. It's incumbent upon us as faculty, whether that's full-time or even adjunct, to put pressure on CUNY to come out and be vocal in their support. Not just their support for trans people, support for immigrants at this time, support for all marginalized groups under attack at this time. There's a lot of confusion out there. There's a lot of, I'm going to call it strategic pausing out there. People are dragging their feet. That's not good enough right now. We are seeing people getting disappeared. Like, that's not even hyperbole anymore. We're seeing people, students getting disappeared. We are seeing college universities working, obeying in advance, working with the government to ensure that these people are disappeared. That is unacceptable, and we need to be more vocal as disciplines, as unions, and as overarching organizations. We need to be very vocal on how that is no longer acceptable. Because if we keep operating in silence, that always takes the side of the oppressor. And there's no reason for the oppressor not to think that. So we need to turn up the volume to 11.
I would add one more thing, which is because you asked about, like, how do we make up for the funding that's being pulled, that's federal funding that's supporting these universities, that's supporting these programs, which we talked about a little while ago. The chancellor of the city of New York and the chancellor of the SUNY, they have to go before the legislature and make their case and submit what it is that they're seeking funding for. And so I would hope that they are making the case that if any of their curriculum or programs or studies or centers that may or may not be federally funded, that they're losing that they're asking for that to be replaced from the state government or the city in the case of CUNY. They do have to sit there and go through a hearing and answer questions and say what it is that they want in the budget for their universities.
I think we have time for one more. One more? Question or follow-up question? Okay, then I think that we are at time. Again, I want to thank Brooklyn College's LGBTQ Resource Center for creating this space, for allowing us to gather and to share thoughts, to share strategies, and we are now also going to be moving this to the Resource Center itself, correct? Great. So again, thank you everyone for coming today. Thank you to our speakers today.
Thank you. This is Stephanie.
And to Kai, I'm sure she's with us.
She would have been great to have.
I know.
You know.
Oh. That's okay.
Oh
my God.
If you didn't sign in, if you managed to pass through, you can always put an alias. You don't have to put your email.